Greetings, this is I, Tentus Naravan Dracovin, your Lord Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome to all of you out there. Brain fart there for a second. Hey, if you're joining me now, live, hi, thank you for being here on Twitch. If you're joining me later on YouTube, hi YouTube, always enjoy you there. For you guys, liking, subscribing, ring the bell, all that kind of stuff is great. So, we're diving into Mage The Ascension once more today, and continuing our tour of the Council of Nine Mystic Traditions. If you have played one of today's topic, Cult of Ecstasy, why don't you let me know? Either live here, you can just throw it over into the chat, and let all of us know about your adventures as a member of the Cult of Ecstasy, or in the description of the YouTube video. So, why don't we dive in here today, because I'm going to caveat things here. For the books I'll talk about that I can give suggestions to check out for more information, not all the images are great. So that's my first caveat here. My second caveat is I'm going to try to go through enough of this, but there is a large section here on factions that if I really went into detail about all the different factions of the Cult of Ecstasy, I'd be here for quite a long time. So I'm going to give you basically a summary of each of the different various factions, how they're put in there, just a little bit of information on each of them, and we'll keep it simple. And if you want to look into it more, I would recommend either one of these books, or you can probably Google and look it up online, and like one of the Wikipedias and stuff like that. So let's get started, though. And of course, the great place to get started is with the books. And again, apologies for all the images. Some of these are good, and some of these I could not find a great image of the book. So when we start with talking about anything in Mage the Ascension, especially like traditions, the best place to start is, well, the core books. And the Mage the Ascension, the original one. This is Mage the Ascension revised. It's not a great image, but it's there. It's there, sort of. And of course, the M20 book, for the most updated version of Cult of Ecstasy, would be here. Now, these are your basics places where you got to start looking. But if you want to dive into depth, which would include both lore and some members, and of course, abilities, I would recommend the two tradition books. Of course, that's the original tradition book, and then the revised tradition book, that's very tiny. Let me do this one, so it's a little bit larger. See, there's the Cult of Ecstasy books. These I couldn't find a great picture of at all. Nowhere a great picture. But there's also the Guide to Traditions from Revised Edition that you could probably look at, too. Anyway. Well, we're starting with a member of the Cult of Ecstasy. Well, why is that? Well, when we're going to start today, I'm going to structure this in an interesting way, because I was looking over my information on the Cult of Ecstasy and how I want to talk about it. And let's start talking about the individual member of the Cult of Ecstasy, kind of what they are, an individual. Then we'll talk about their history. Then we'll talk about how they are organized as a group, and then we'll end up with the factions today. So that's how we're going to discuss things. So I hope you join me on this tour. So the Cult of Ecstasy. They're also known as the Sahajiya, which is derived from a Sanskrit word, sahaja, meaning spontaneous or natural. They are a group of mages and visionary seers who seek to transcend boundaries and limitations through sacred experiences. That sounds nice and good, but when you try to kind of dive into that, what causes these sacred experiences? Well, for the cult, drugs, music, sex. But again, these aren't the point of it. They're a means to an end. They are the easiest way to experience this sacred experience that has been discovered. If something was better for diving into this mental state that they wish to achieve, this transcendence of the physical world, this trance that they wish to dive into, that's kind of like induced by these things, an experience beyond what your average mage would have, then yeah, they would use it. For cultists, the word ecstasy is its original meaning, a sudden intense rush of feeling that catapults the subject into an altered state. So keep that in mind. When we talk about ecstasy for the Cult of Ecstasy, it's trying for that change in mindset. And this doesn't have to be a pleasant feeling. But, of course, given a choice, most cultists would prefer it being ecstasy, and a positive one. And ecstasy, the more common, modern version of it, I mean. I'm going to probably do that a couple of times. Old ecstasy, new ecstasy. Sahaja breaks down barriers and self-imposed limitations to give people a rush of eye-opening experience. All right. And let me note, they are the seat of time on the Council of Nine Mystic Traditions. Their current representative, their certain primus, is Leigh Ann Miller. We'll talk about her for a minute when we get to the history section, but this is just facts you should know. So, let's look at what it means as an individual to be a member of this. We can look at the paradigm. So, the paradigm involves a number of things. First off, it incorporates a number of ecstasy and out-of-body experiments into their enlightenment from across the globe. They've kind of developed their sensibilities. Lakashim, the heartbeat of the world, Damia, the serpent road, has many names. It's the creation of the heartbeat, the pulse that can feel if they want to. All emotions, passions, and unconscious mind tap into the pulse, with the intellect blocking the perceptions, but then focusing them into the perfect consciousness that sends the person above mere intellect and sensations. Both are using both to achieve the communion with the Lakashim. It's basically the state you're trying to go for. The state means suspending time and being able to alter reality at a whim. You try to focus to achieve the ideal whenever possible, and many paths being based on enhanced sensations past the normal human limits, as the Lakashim waits beyond those boundaries. It's this state of existence. All right. Now let's talk about the Anada. It's being able to catch a sight of a true face of reality, gives the seers indescribable moments of exaltation, and a bliss that stops time. That's called Anada. Bliss that makes them able to work magic by sidestepping reality and gives them an understanding and newfound respect to all aspects of creation. It cannot be described, only felt. Anada. Most faiths and magics are just a way of capturing this bliss. Most people are never able to capture more than a glimpse of it and are driven to despair and fanaticisms, creating war and conflict. And Ojas, the vital force, brought by fusing passions and perceptions. We've kind of talked about both of these now, in a way, in the way they look at them. It's what allowed the ecstatic to get a higher state and look behind the boundaries that blind human beings all the time. Everyone can feel this, but most of the time it's only felt during times of extreme bliss or stress. Time feels slower and everything is much more alive. Members of the Cult of Ecstasy are able to tune into that energy, perform miracles, and focus on any task. Okay, so I hope that kind of gives you an idea. They're merging the state of bliss with the state of higher consciousness into something that they can use to perform their abilities. Right? We all got that? It's, you know, it's a concept that we kind of have to dive into a little bit. So when it comes to members of the Cult of Ecstasy, Avatar, there's really no common agreement what it really is. Your muse, a demon deep inside. The most obvious thing is that it's an aspect of the mage that assists them on the life path. Some say it's the unconscious saying what the mages know but don't want to hear. Others think it's their future selves, spirit totems, past lives, demons, angels, platonic ideals, other range of possibilities. It's the thing that cultists of ecstasy are really bad at figuring out the exact thing of what an avatar is. Now when we talk about ascension, that's when a mage is able to advance the highest levels of the path of enlightenment. So when able to discard the mortal blindfold and completely achieve a state of everlasting Anada. So you see we're getting back to that ecstasy level, your everlasting ecstasy, allowing you to kind of see everything constantly because you're using the ecstasy to see constantly, and you're in that kind of perfect state all the time. Comprehending everything in creation is single heartbeat. And Ascension is a personal moment, according to them. And there's no single way to achieve it. That's another important thing. Each individual has to find their own way. So even so, many of the members of the Cult of Ecstasy find the whole idea terrifying, preferring brief flashes of truth than a single endless pleasure. With the ideal heaven being that where you can get a moment of short break from the mortal world after going back for another ride. Life is more interesting than eternity, basically. So that's why it's a mixed bag whether you're going to see a Cult of Ecstasy actually aiming for Ascension as much more than some of the others. Plenty of other traditions actually put Ascension as the final goal. The idea of if you want to ascend, that's kind of a thing here. Now, we can't talk about the Cult of Ecstasy. We can talk about what they use to do their abilities. And things like sex, drugs, music, dance are their tools, their practices. And they aren't wanton hedonists. You have to remember that. That's something that they're kind of seen as very often, but it is sophisticated actual behavior that they're doing. Ecstasy, the kind of Latin term out of stasis, is what they want. They want to transcend reality, see beyond the boundaries. And again, as I said earlier, these things are the tools to stimulate their bodies and minds to go farther. Now, a lot of different tools can be used. If you're using tribal inspirations, tattoos, piercings, rites of ordeal can focus their magic. Some might use gadgets on their own bodies, turning music, videos, virtual reality, cybernetics, and new art forms, tantric Taoist arts, sexual mass pleasure rites, ritualized self-mutilations, fasting, extreme physical activities, ancient yoga disciplines, summoning of Zoltergeist, spirits of an era. It's basically, there is no exact way that any one of them necessarily practices. There are sometimes similarities, but each has their own way of doing it. Now let's talk about these three major, it's like the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, except the sex, drugs, and music. Sex. It excites the body and mind in unique ways. It's a rush. It's a common and social activity in one, too. And it is more than a simple procreation in the form of worship. Basically, during sex, the ojas are summoned and power circulates throughout the body. So most members of the Cult of Ecstasy consider non-consensual sex something monstrous and unforgivable. Keep that in mind. No form of consensual sex is taboo to them. And many of them are actually omnisexual. As simple orientations just break barriers, or are barriers to break, I should say. There are three types of sex to them: high sex, lovemaking, low sex. High sex raises the oja and channels energy from one another in a ritualistic disciplining faction. Tantric magic comes in obvious ways to exemplify that, so it's basically the higher we're sharing our mystical energies between us. Lovemaking is more sharing affections, still energy between lovers and friends. It's more spontaneous, it expresses more pure emotion. It's for things like mentors and pupils. It's a bond, that kind of thing. While low sex is just outright sexual relations with nothing else, for the sake of pleasure, but it can be powerful as the others if done right, including Lakashim during climax. Remember that state we talked about when we first talked about their idealism? Yeah. Drugs. Many do have a penchant for using it. Again, giving stereotypes to their tradition. It's not simple chemicals. They're tools to expand their minds, to turn their perceptions inside out. The danger of losing the sight of their way is there, however. So they must ensure they don't become dependent on them, and at some point can grow beyond their usage to touch ecstasy. They usually classify drugs into three categories: running towards, running away, and bad shit. The first group are gateways to the unconscious. They create energy, foster activity, bolster and encourage actions. The second group, running away, are groups that are ones that relax energy, turn one into itself, and leads to inability to act. The third group are uncontrollable chemicals that cause dangerous side effects and causing problems, not helping magic at all. So, yes. They will define which ones you will use. And finally, music, of course. It's one of the safest, Kama Marga. It's slower. It does offer still experience that no other can focus to replicate if done correctly. Young members of the group consider that even if all music has potential, rock music brings a resonance only matched by primitive drumming. So, hey, rock music's a pretty big one. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. More importantly to the point of music is the passion. If there's caring that the artist is trying to say something with it, the music will have power. So now you should understand a member of the Cult of Ecstasy a little bit more. Let's talk about where they come from. And the thing is, I'm kind of going to hit on some stuff here for their history. It's the fact that they are a group that kind of has old ties. Mages that use these things to achieve a new level of understanding are a thing that has existed. And they are technically the seat of time. But understanding kind of how they came together is a difficulty. So, when we start looking to ancient history, we can find some ties that were there. Things like shamans, madmans, artists, old texts of beings and individuals that dove into this. Places like Greece and Rome had some connections, Mesoamerica, but I'm not going to go into necessarily depths of this point in time. There's just this core that existed that is part of the Cult of Ecstasy's way of doing things that did exist back in these times. If you want to read up on themselves a little bit more for this time period, I could say you do it. When we really get to the Dark Ages is where we get our first real hint of the creation of this, with Shahar the Seer. Now, this isn't that other things are going on. In Asia, we've got Tantra, with Buddhism coming into existence, which that's a big part of that's kind of fused with the cult as we know it today. And that information spread from Asia. So it is an important thing that came into being during this time period. But there were others that were kind of, during this Dark Ages period, elevating things. So Dark Ages, conspiracy arose. It was one that denied ecstasy and other forms of mysticism. One that burnt Sanskrit writings of the Vedas and the Tantric alchemical recipes, declared all of them lies. It was the order of reason that came about during this time periods. There was a seer that saw the storm coming, and his prophecy was clear. Magic would die unless all magicians banded together under the same flag to counter this new threat. Nobody believed him at first, but soon they noticed the following and understand his truth. He was called Shazar, and would be the founder of the Cult of Ecstasy tradition under the name of Seers of Kronos. So, when we talk about Seers of Kronos, I'm not going to go into them today. I'll probably have to do a Renaissance Dark Age version of them. They are the beings that the people that became the Cult of Ecstasy, so keep that in mind. But we're going to kind of like leave them as their own video, if you do like a Dark Age Mage thing. Actually, we can do a little bit here. It's basically the Cult of Ecstasy, I guess, actually. I just was making sure there wasn't any more information. I might have to look up to see if there's more information, but I'll say for now, it's just another name for now. If there's more information, enough of it to do its own video, I'll do it. But for now, we'll just keep in mind, we're known as the Seers of Kronos. Shazar took to 23 masters. Explaining the order of reason would cast a net that would turn the world into reason. So, there were 3 others, Divias, that joined him in his journeys through Eastern Europe to reach France, where he met the masters using his own mastery of time. The masters listened, bitter enemies who changed their minds after hearing what he had to say. And by 1440, the foundations of the Council of 9 Mystic Traditions were ready. So, that's an important thing here. The Seers of Kronos, the Cult of Ecstasy, were instrumental in creating the Council of 9 Mystic Traditions. They, of course, traveled across the world looking for their own kinds, and Shazar knew he needed enough political power to force the traditions to do the right thing, and not mattering on his own pride. So a second meeting was arranged, and after 9 years of debate, they finally founded the council. Shazar melded all the different sects who knew the ecstasy into a single tradition to stand along those who formed the new Council of Nine. Each tradition needed specialty, and time was the most obvious for the esoterics, and were named Seers of Kronos. So basically, he predicted what the Order of Reason would do, become the technocracy, and he brought together the people that would form the Council of Nine Master Traditions, and then he looked to his people and he united them together into one tradition. So he stayed as a representation of these seers, while firmly believing the abuse of power was blasphemy to the divine gift of life. He wanted to show that if people could just understand the miracle they lived in, they would live in harmony. So he devised the Code of Anata, a list of proverbs that illustrate the wisdom of the esoteric, should have the responsibilities they should uphold. Shazar preached the code with real fervor, and the message, do what you want, but never harm anyone. And it resounded not only across the seers, but all nine traditions. So this code, even though it's not adopted by the other traditions, it affected them. And within their own, within his own tradition, they had the freedom to explore their limits, but there was terms. They were to understand how what they do will impact other people, and how they would feel in that position. And the seers gained respect from other traditions by the force of personality and arcane powers. Now we go to the Great Betrayal in 1466. And we'll talk about the Code of Anata a little later on. This is when the council passed the first compact of Callias. The first cabal was formed. The first group of mages from different traditions represent the hopes of the nascent Council of Nine in the Ascension War. Achares was the representative of the Seers of Council and the Cabal. They initiated the March of Nine with the goal of revitalizing wonder and magic, with the inspiration and deeds against the clutches of the Order of Regions and other enemies like the Infernalists. They were betrayed by their own leader, Helium Tenomim Banum Sophistiki, and some other members of the council blamed Achares for it, saying his own friendships with Helium made him cover for this Sophati even if they knew what happened as his ability as a seer. So yeah, it did stain the Seer of Kronos' name at this point in time. And Achares did not defend himself. Whether or not he was connected to this betrayal or not, he never said. But he didn't do anything and just disappeared into the unknown. Shazar followed him and vanished. And another one of the founders disappeared too. So the remaining Divyas, who were kind of under the seer, refused to let the tradition collapse, though. They struggled to continue Shazar's dreams. And one of them, Eos, would complete Shazar's work with the Nine Sacred Passions, a book that described the connection between soul, passion, and ascension, reinforcing the ethics and code of Anata that they had. Europe went crazy with religious wars, inquisitions, reformations, persecutions of all kinds. The Order of Reasons fanned its flame for a while, mages went underground, and the Seers of Kronos renamed themselves Sahajiya. Most fled to India and the Middle East to avoid these conflicts. They chose places with their strong roots and lands with other traditions, claiming Europe for them. Those that remained in Europe were wanderers and considered mad beggars. In the council, the Code of Anata struggled to be considered an official protocol. Eos died in 1562, and Jana, another one of the members' second son, Sidu Asava, fought against the Agaris, who were behind the plot to eliminate the code. So yes, now we get into the Age of Reason. Whew. We've gone forward in time. Religious warfare, continued by centuries of colonialism, revolution. The council was shaken during all of it. Colonialism brought the loss of many allies within the Dreamspeaker ranks, and the Enlightenment spread across the world. Colonial powers approached the Sahajiya in their strongholds in Indias, the Americas. The esoterics counterattack. The ideals of the Victorian age did not help, as their strict moral codes stood against the ecstatic waves. So then we have the Cult of Bacchus. Kali cultists that fought against British power with assassination, madness, plague, and uprising. The Sahajia became a real terror for the Technocratic Union, destroying everything important before they could finish it up. Of course, these Kali Rajas disbanded in 1840s, but there are still some that supposedly survive into today in some form. They fought against settlers, using magic to cause whole cavalry units disappear. In the Americas, in Europe, hellfire clubs made the entrance, and romantic poets showed their disillusionment, debauchery, indulgence. This was the cult of Bacchus, that they became known as during this time period. Violence became a different way of things. And this was for a while, unfortunately for them. But then a miracle happened. In a cloud of hashish, Shazar suddenly appeared, making it clear he was the master of time. If he didn't understood the times, he definitely knew the problem. He spoke for hours, reminding his descendants of the highest passion, that was supposed to be joy, not hate, and poured his accumulated misery of all the victims of the renegades into the crowd, just for them to understand. And this was like during a big members of their high-end council. Their mission was to bring ecstasy to people, to heal humanity, and not indulge in sensations and anger. And he knew they were heading towards their own destruction. The cult of Bacchus lacked vision, was violent, and devoured others who could not be inspired. The cult of Bacchus was devoted to self-gratification and orgies of violence. So he changed the name to Cult of Ecstasy, with a devote to exploration, breaking personal boundaries of enlightenment and passage. And his appearance had the tradition as a whole once again embraced the code of Ananda. He vanished as he appeared. No one knows what happened with him. Maybe he jumped into the future crisis, or maybe still floating in the realms of time, adjusting things here and there across history. But this dark period for the cult ended as their founder popped back into existence and said, whoosh. Well, he did it very nicely. Pat, pat, pat. No, don't do that. Do this. Now we get into more modern eras. We're back. We're from Bacchus to ecstasy. The standard of living is building up. There's wages, free times, chance to discover different things. People are not bound to specific work or social class. Electricity came about. Radio, television, trains, automobiles, planes, news wired across the world in seconds. New ideas, experiences, experimentations. Humanity had a chance to grasp its own destiny. There was a dark side to all this too. And, the cult was there to clean up the screw-ups and people that went into this dark side. World War I was terrible. It was misery, death. There was also rebellion. It almost caught the cult by surprise, even with their mastery of time. And some probably not even wanted to believe such a thing could happen. Following the 20s and 30s, roaring with excess and streams, war and prohibition supported kind of crisis for the cult, who did not know how it was supposed to fight human suffering in such a situation, saw the fear of the authorities for people making their own lives meant strict rules and following without exceptions. There were backlashes, downward spirals. It was an Effendi's playground during this time. And then we had World War II. Their traditions in the Union divided on what side the war they should align, the Effendi being the ones that behind the hand pulling strings. If something was averting total disaster, and that's how the Council of Nine and Technocratic Union were able to come together against all of this and stop the whole thing, afraid of the unavoidable end results if things followed the same path. So basically, Effendi influence created World War II, and this is one of the times that the Technocratic Union and the Council of Nine Mystic Traditions got together to stop it. We get the 50s and 60s. And the cult was against the technocratic model of ways of things, continuing to kind of face against them. Hey, the 60s. We get to the end of the century. Following the Following all these decades, it was like a big bucket of ice water in the ecstatics in the cult's face. There was not an awakening. The movement did not last long. No one controlled it. They were not prepared for it. The summer of love ended, and with it the party, and it was cleaning time now. They refused to let it go, and some of the consumer culture and corporate power decades of the 70s and 80s reminded them that some things are believed less buried. Social conservatism, system crackdowns on human rights. We go into the 90s and 2000s. It was waking from a dream, and the dreamer was really angry to see how everything was. So basically their 50s and 60s were this, boom of, excitement of everything, and it kind of goes bad. Of course, now we turn to post-Reckoning, where we had the entire thing with the Horizon Council getting messed up, and then we've got the New Horizon Council. Celebrated in Los Angeles in 2001, the Cult of Ecstasy was Representative Joybringer Lee Ann Miller. With a very unskilled mage in her group, but she had sincerity, open-mindedness, and makes an important part of the new council, and basically has positioned herself in this council very well. And so she's the current leader there. And she's a singular character of the entire thing here. Let's talk culture and organization. Now that we know the history of the Cult of Ecstasy. Alright. If you look on the outside, it looks like a never-ending party for them. And some of the younger ones, that might be true. They lurch from one debauchery to the next, trying to find enlightenment. Most members, ecstatics, know that the most things are best sampled in moderation, lest their passions become blunted and then ruined for them. Moderation might be different from the average person, but that's kind of how you look at it. And if you look beneath these stereotypes, there's contradictions and controversy even amongst the members, most of whom seem to quite enjoy the lively and passionate debates. Even things passed down through the ages are often debated. The Code of Anata is debated, upheld by some, outright rejected by others. Their guidelines to protect the cultists from their passions and each other. They're not acceptable by all ecstatics. There was the second book, the Sacred Nine Passions, which has also led to debate. So let's talk about the things. We have Sahaja, methods of pursuit of passion and emotions, often the 9 sacred passions. Knowing that only passion can take them high enough to surpass human boundaries and perceptions to reach the eternal moment. Some of these are more enlightened than others, as the true purpose and source of emotion, but pursuit is the same. So your guidelines come in the form of different things. The 10 Commandments of Ecstasy, the Codes of Anana, are an important one, passed down by their organizer. And, it's to protect them from their issues, a lot of times. I'll read off the codes here just to give you an idea about it. Thou art miraculous, so are we. He who spits on the ground, so he spits on his good right hand, shall find the left one fails him in need. Each gold coin yields 2 like it. Each stalk given creates a bundle, yet each coin taken turns to rest, to dross, and one bundle gone creates a famine. Thus shall a seer count his deeds. Look, I'm not going to interpret these. Some minds rest best asleep. Stir not those who would not awaken otherwise. Truths foreseen are not always truths. If a man or a woman would rend another's passions, let him be as one torn by wild dogs. For passions are the seat of the self, and if they bleed, so too does the soul. Let each seer account his own deeds, and if those deeds should want for wisdom or kindness, let him put forth to weep alone. Humor cooleth blood, wrath spilleth it. Even trees rent by lightning may grow new fruit. A fool feels no fear, a sleeper remains shackled by it, a master transcends it, yet recalls its wisdom. It is good to be afraid, it is folly to bow to terror. Alright. So the code is taught by most traditions centuries, as expected of their members to adhere to it. It is not really a law, it's more a declaration of ethics. And there are theorists and extreme groups that reject the code, and even in this group here. It's a code of respect. Feelings are good, are not good or bad, they just are. That's part of the 9 sacred passions. They fit what the esoteric stance is about. All emotions have a positive and a negative. The only thing that's really bad is the lack of passion. Emotions are linked to divinity. As they know what damage can cause uncontrollable emotions, they believe in self-discipline embodied by the Code of Anatta. Feelings are not inherently bad, it's just what they do with them. And the book by Tali Essos is, goes into depth about this. Let's talk about their organization a little bit. So the best asset of them is their flexibility. They understand no boundary is permanent. They're able to see that there are always new ways to achieve a goal and new ways to live their lives. This means their structure is thrown away in exchange for rebellion and craziveness. The closest thing the cult does have to a formal structure lies in the Code of Anatta. The proverbs of bliss that teach joy, compassion, sacred emotion, respect for others' passions, in a kind of ethical guide that encourages each member to embrace the differences of others. It's then unsurprising that there's very little structure to the entire group. They do not see the need for hierarchy organizations. They just work together, if just because they like to be with other people. If a problem between various cultists arrives, it is solved by consensus during one of their meetings. Chantry houses tend to resemble community hangouts, jam session rooms, fraternity houses more than magical workplaces, and they are often inhabited by several cultists and a handful of sleepers. So, Discsham, I'm probably butchering this a little bit. It's the most familiar thing to a formal relationship between people in the cult is Discsham. It's the bond between mentor and student. It's pretty common that their relation gets to the point of lovers, as it represents the bond between two persons to be like if they are just one. Student learns to be smart enough to not be prey of the paradox or other dangers. Even if they are supposed to respect their mentor, there is no obligation to service, and it is the initiate who wants to learn. The mentor's duties are to guide to enlightenment and to make sure the student understands their new position. Okay. Now, I'm not going to spend another hour talking about the various factions here. I'm going to give you a little bit about them, because there's a lot of sects and factions, and if you want to be a specific member of them, you can look into them more. I'm going to try to give a little bit of information about each of them as we kind of go down. So, not all cultists are members of this. The cultists are loners. Many of them gather into sects, as a thing. Plenty of them are even previous to Shazar, and one can recognize the members thanks to their purposes, distinct marks, tattoos, oaths. There are more communities in countries with a lot of traditions, folklore, long history, but they're pretty much present everywhere. There are too many of them to go over all of them. I'm going to go over as many as possible. So there are some historical ones. These are ones that predate Shazar and the establishment of the Code of Anatta. They're very stable, ancient, ritualized styles, and they joined with it. The Erzuli Jingo, which is primarily female Vudanistas, aligned with the Cult of Ecstasy from the days of their African forebears. They're members of the Vudan faith and devote themselves to healing the minds of others by clearing their dreams with the help of their Loa. The Fellowship of Pan inherits the legacy of the Cult of Dionysus. These esoterics believe the human must embrace their primal natural order to find ecstasy. Beneath them, there are two smaller groups. The Kiss of Astartes, a modern pagan set within their foundation. Many of the ones are lesbian, some even have ties with the Black Furies. And the Maidids, a fierce and violent lot, even with impressive and old legacy. They're modern female followers of Dionysus that have learned to be more subtle and discreet than their ancestors. The Kan Lu, Taoist esoterics dedicated to perfecting the self. They seek to perfect themselves. They aren't seeking to heal people or moving others towards enlightenment. They follow a decent portion of the Code of Anatta, but they seek to ascend and free themselves of the karmic cycle. The Vratyas, Nepalese esoterics that practice their deepest secrets of tantric magic and live in seclusion. They militantly defend their ways from outsider, including other cultists. Then there's dissidents against Anatta, factions that are in defiance of the Code of Anatta. The Angoris, the oldest of dissident factions, descendants of Shatari cultists outside of Bengal. They were some of the first to join with Shazar in the Alliance and don't believe in that part of it. The Arcane, an all-male sect that practices ecstasy through psychological and physical torment. They seek to perfect the waves by beating itself into submission. The Hagalas, Norse pagans who adhere fiercely to old beliefs. They wage war on modernity and Christianity. Named after the Room of Change, they live in a perpetual state of change and chaos, forcing the world to see everything from their perspective. Under there are a couple of smaller groups. The Freyji, worshippers of the female Dita, who is wife of Odin. Sons of Wanton, necromantic berserkers who are said to continue fighting even while headless. The Surti, as Loki priests, the Surti use rune carvings and traps to defeat their enemies. Then we have progressives, factions that are bringing the cult into the modern age, innovating old philosophies with modern tools. The Joybringings, percentage-wise, are the largest faction in the Cult of Ecstasies. Joybringers are what most conceptualize as the stereotypical ecstatic. They seek to teach you other simple pleasures to exist. The Dissonant Society, they share many beliefs with the Joybringers. Instead of a peaceful accord, this sect wants to overthrow society and start anew. They're anarchists, philosophers, debaters, and terrorists. Coolbricks is a young esoteric sect that seeks to unite humanity via total Abaddon through music. They kind of have some connections to the Fellowship of the Pan. They seek to unite with the underlying subconscious of the beat of humanity. Then there are political factions, because the cultists are activists, taking people to the boundaries and beyond. The Children's Crusade is a group's political agenda is simple. Protect the children. They divide. While the cult dives into drugs and sexual bliss, they strongly oppose subjecting children to these things. The children aren't mature enough to get anything out of it, and frankly can emotionally scar or worsen them. The Cult of Acceptance, a political movement who attempts to clean up the esoteric's image by pushing for social change, legalizing marijuana, decriminalizing some sexual acts, education of consensual S&M, things like that. Dance schools, art, under the cult's acceptance aim. The Silver Bridges seek to bridge the gulf between religion and ecstasy. Hindu Tantra works a fine focus. Most religions have a hard time swallowing the cult's practice. So that's where the Silver Bridges come in. Some other sects are the Fifth World Tribe, Los Sabinos Locos. It incorporates Native American shamanism, hippie anarchism, powerful music as a goal to shake up modern culture. The Kaha project their essence from their bodies after hours of tantric exercise, dance, and herbal drugs. They're oftentimes female. Their women are oftentimes bisexual. They often choose female lovers to achieve a seed of ecstasy while they go on to find male partners to add to it. The Christi Flagellants, a Russian Christian Orthodox sect to believe that in order to achieve forgiveness, one must sin. After indulging in forbidden pleasures, they punish themselves through ritual penance. Bongo's Rangers, a discordant sect based on the unraveling of consciousness, the use of high-tech and magic to overload all kinds of stimulation. Some other ones that are also here are the Dervish, Sufi mystics who seek spiritual enlightenment through poverty and religious study under masters. Comfrey de Chango, one of several small sects based out of Vodun, like the Urzai Jingo, all the music dance. Rhoda de Jongo, another set of volantists, one that are Brazilian martial arts. I'm going to be butchering a lot of these, so apologies if I butcher any of these words. I'm saying that now. I usually say this earlier. Los Sangrados, descendants of Zoetian Locks and many other Mayan priests, a secret cult in Central America. Studiosi, the zealous ones influenced by flagellant movements in Italy and Germany after the Abyssinian Crusades. The Mlyenye, Russian Christian Orthodox esoterics who seek visions through a state of raw emotion and religious ecstasy brought on by the visions of religious iconography and holy symbols. Whew! And there we go. And also, I may note the image we got here is, is our good old here, Leon Malner, who's also the, oh boy, sorry, is the signature character of the Cult of Ecstasy. There we go. Sorry, brain, it didn't work for a second. So yes, if you're going to be looking, I would recommend going beyond First Edition. First Edition will introduce the Cult of Ecstasy, but it was very very just what they plainly were. You know, they kind of like showed them off where it was like, oh, that's their, you know, what people see them as. That's what they were in first edition, very much so. And it was up until second edition, revised, and beyond there, where they became more of a tradition, and the sequence of transcendence was kind of coming in. So, if you do look at the first edition book, you will get some information, but it will be the lowest end of it. All right. That broke. I don't know why. What's gone? But that's the Cult of Ecstasy. They're a very interesting group. A very diverse group. A group that not only has very deep traditions, but you can see is very important. Yes. In their initial founding, they were very important to creating the Council of Nine Mystic Traditions. And yes, there was an event which basically tarnished them. And then everything that happened with the Age of Reason led them to a dark path. But they rebounded with the help of their founder, who came through time, theoretically. I mean, more than one person saw it. A lot of people saw their founder pop in through time. So it's not like they were all drug-induced. It was enough of them that it was like, ah, shit, our founder, who's a master of time magic, was actually able to time travel and help us out and get us down the right path. And that's what he did. The Cult of Ecstasy was born from those early days. And it still is what it is. A loose collection of a lot of dudes people who have this idea to transcend things, to find ecstasy. And the easiest, well, maybe not easiest, but the way they want to do it is through pleasure. Sex, drugs, music, dance, that kind of stuff. And yes, there's traditions and ancient ways of doing things, and some seek enlightenment and their ecstasy in other ways. Old-timey ecstasy's definition. But each of them still fits this group, the Cult of Ecstasy. They still all work together there, even if they don't necessarily get along or agree all the time, but they're up for happily debate. And yes, this ethics code, which is kind of out there, and it does exist within many of the other traditions that they know the ethics code of the Cult of Ecstasy introduced. Maybe a lot of them don't follow it, but you know it enough that you know this code, which is a pretty good code for existence. And the Cult of Ecstasy does tend to fit it, to hit into it very heavily. Not all of them, but many. They're an interesting position, an interesting people, and an interesting philosophy. Yeah, they're sort of a group. When I talk about a lot of the other orders, traditions, they have actual order. The Cult of Ecstasy doesn't really. But they're there, and yeah, I think that's the best I can say about it. They're there, they're interesting, they have a philosophy that's very interesting, and certainly, it kind of would be fun to play with. I wouldn't go as far as certainly some other people do. The Cult of Ecstasy can fall into the same trap as Malkavian and Vampire the Masquerade. The extremes can take over the character. So just know, just like Malkavian and their insanity, the Cult of Ecstasy, yeah, you'll have sex, you'll have drugs, you got some rock and roll, but it's there for a purpose. It's there within moderation. And it's there to help you transcend via ecstasy. I thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this, I talk about tabletop weekly, usually live, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays/Saturdays. Saturdays is the backup day if I miss any one of those days. And discuss tabletop topics, go over lore, mechanics, all those kind of things for you. You can always catch them on YouTube if you can't catch me live over on Twitch. Those are the Twitch days. Usually it's afternoons or early mornings, depending on the daily schedule. I'll throw it up in my Discord and Twitter when I go live. Discord, usually I'll do it, and most of the time I let people know my general schedule for the week. Other things I do other tabletop stuff. Crimson Queen Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Always shout that out. It's my live play that's going on as the time of this video. And of course, Discussing Tabletop, 6 p.m. on Saturdays. That's my tabletop discussion program. And that's Pathfinder First Edition, 9 p.m. EST on Wednesdays. I do other gaming streams if you want to check those out, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. Everything that's tabletop goes up on YouTube. I have Discord and Twitter, as I mentioned. Check out their links below for social media. And that's it. That's all my schedule. Shout-outs, all those things, which I like giving. Anyway, I'm going to get going. I hope you all enjoyed. And the next time we talk about this or anything else, I bid you a deep and wonderful farewell.